Well, this afternoon's last panel is trying to connect art and culture to one of the most brutal distortions of the human imaginable. And there always comes a point in time whenever I'm working on these matters in which I have to stop and maybe take a walk around the block 3, 5, 50 times because I have put myself in the position of a vulnerable parent and know the names of the little children who have been murdered in the most cruel and brutal ways. So to use the term art and culture, we also are exposing ourselves to the vulnerability of compassion and solidarity, those who are lost and beyond our memory, who were taken suddenly from us and never to return, and those who live with the nightmare of the poem that you read so beautifully, of the second generation that is living knowing that their parents are in an empty, or in a bed where they have nightmares every single night. Art and culture, on the other hand, are not rivals. They're friends. And it's a great honor for me to be in this space in Bar Ilan with one of the Holocaust scholars that I've admired for a long time and just met for the first time in my life up at Yad Vashem yesterday. And to be in the presence of Jackie Conforti, who was the one who encouraged me to make a film that is available tomorrow in the Cinematech. It's called Empty Boxcars. I'll say a word at the end about Nazi Deutsch and where I got the title. It's from Berlin. It's from the RSHA, the Reichssicherheit Hauptamt. And in German, the title is Leerer Wagen. And the emptiness that fills our souls when we ponder the way the theologian, rabbi, scholar, builder of a museum, interviewer with the kind of patience that Jackie described earlier today. Michael Berenbaum was president of the Shoah Visual History Foundation that interviewed over 52,000 survivors, when most of them, up to that point, had been told the very stupid advice that you're in America now, shut up, we don't want to hear about all that Holocaust stuff, get on with your life. That was not psychiatric advice that did any therapeutic healing. Those were cruel words, ignorant words, that almost guaranteed that the survivors would continue in the grip of the depression and loneliness and isolation that gripped their every night nightmare. So the kind of ambiguity about making films about this thing are stripped from artists. All the normal vocabulary, as it does from historians who give a damn, all those words are off. You can't say, well, we're going to see a film tonight, hope you enjoy it. You can't say a lot of things about Holocaust films, except that it is an opportunity for artists to behave in the way that Jackie has just encouraged us in his earlier presentation this afternoon. To have the enormous patience to encourage people who have been through the darkest periods of their lives to hope beyond hope and beyond the despair that fills most of our hearts most of the time, that there is light that can yet penetrate the darkness of their lives. And those of you who know anything about astronomy, and believe me, I mean astronomy, not in astrology, and I don't believe in a lot of the hocus-pocus stuff that is attributed by the Romans to the various planets that surround us, such as Mars, and Eros, that is supposed to be Venus. Rather, I look into the belt of Orion and NASA images that tell me that creation is still happening. It didn't end with Bereshit's word, Vayehi or. It is going on and on and on. And every day that new stars are born in this star factory, if I can call it that, it makes us think twice about those shameful factories of manufacturing death in the 6 camps that have been alluded to again in the poem that we heard at the beginning, that words have more than one meaning. And to come into one of those dreadful murdering places in a boxcar, and to leave that place as ashes up a chimney, gives us a completely different idea of, say, Santa Claus coming up and down a chimney and leaving gifts behind, or other ways of thinking of warming your house, as I come from the little cottages in Ireland, knowing what imperial oppression is like from the British that wrecked this part of the world by lying to the Palestinians about the Jews, and by lying to the Jews about the Palestinians, so that it has made me very, very difficult to share this land of peace with love and respect for your own neighbors. I say that with a lot of humility as an American, because our imperialism was no better than the British, and we've left lots of cruelty and devastation in the wake that you experience here in Israel. Well, I had a whole paragraph about Jackie, but he knows me long enough that I have to observe time limits and get on with what I'm going to say about empty boxcars, which I took the view of a person whose dad was in the art of being an actor. And I read a lot of 3-act plays because my dad was an actor. So this is a 3-act play. It begins with persecution, it then digs right into mass murder, and then offers the incredible hope that the mass rescue in Bulgaria can be a glimmer of faint hope for others that doesn't redeem the wickedness of either Hitler, his children, and his collaborators, but does impose upon us a very heavy burden of responsibility to carry on in spite of it all. I don't look up to the stars to get that energy. I do pray to understand the difference between what I can and can't do, and don't walk away from the responsibility on my own shoulders for doing what I can and therefore must. Act 1, well, first of all, I want to say one word about Jackie. He encouraged me to go to Bulgaria, even though I didn't know Bulgarian, and I followed the advice, and luckily enough, I'm fairly fluent in Spanish, and it's like a time warp thing of somebody going back to Stratford-upon-Avon and hearing all these people speaking Shakespeare's English. And I'm in a time warp in Sofia, listening to these Spanish-speaking Jews. It's an old-timers, people my age now, I'm 82. They're speaking Hebrew Spanish because that's where they came from 1492. And I'll be damned, I can understand what they're saying. There are about 3 or 4 words that I miss, but I get the drift of the paragraph, and I go, my God, I can do this film. I can interview them in the gentle, loving way that Jackie says is the only way to do contact with someone who has been traumatized by such suffering and pain. Why? They survived, but members of their own family didn't. And that I learned from a rabbi just to the south of me in Los Angeles named Chaim Asa, who at that time, Chaim is no longer with us, but his daughter is here, and I'd like you to stand up and just say hello. She's one of Israel's finest peacemakers. Get to know her. She's in the Galil. You can find her. Chaim wrote his Master's of Arts dissertation as a rabbinical student in Los Angeles about the Bulgaria story, and came to change his mind about the noble and good king who was the savior of all the Bulgarian Jews when he went with me to open a synagogue in Skopje, and that out of the ashes would arise this new spark of Jewish life in the Balkans. And he was the shaliach of a Torah that had been brought from California to Macedonia, as it then was called, because the Macedonians couldn't find a Torah scroll anywhere in this country. No one wanted to help out the Macedonians start a synagogue. I don't know why, and that's not the burden of my remarks right now. All I know is that when I contacted Victor Mizrahi, it was because there was a piece in the Jerusalem Post that said he had come here and hoped he would get a Torah scroll, and flunked everywhere he went. So I called him up, found his number, and luckily for me, one of my law students at Valparaiso University was named Makedonka Papakovsky. So this woman named Macedonian, in case you don't know what Makedonka is on the phone. We have two phone things as I make this phone call, and she's supposed to say, hello, Victor, we're calling from the United States. We have a question for you. But as it turns out, Victor speaks excellent English and has a booming voice. And she said, here, you can talk to him in English. She's fine. And I said, well, Victor, my name is Ed, and I read about you in the Jerusalem Post, and I see you're looking for a Torah scroll. Is there anything I can do to persuade you that I can get one that's a spare one in a synagogue here, and get it koshered and get the sofer to make sure every little dot is in there, and every yod and every tittle. That's as we say in the New Testament. Don't take out either a yod, the tiniest letter, or the tiniest part of a letter. That's not who Jesus is. He's not an anti-Torah guy. He's a Jew, for heaven's sakes. And if you don't know why, well, his mother is a Jew. That's obvious. Everything she says is Jewish. And so that's all I'm going to say about that right now. But in a book with Michael Berenbaum, we who are Christians acknowledge the terrible responsibility of the contempt for Jews that lasted throughout the Christian centuries until the Vatican Council repudiated it formally in 1965. So those kinds of learning has been going on between Jews and Christians in the United States, and 5 cardinals in the United States chipped in $1,000 apiece to pay the sofer to make sure that scroll had everything that Moshe and all of the others that I think a lot of collaborators, or at least the name Moses stands in for a lot of people, because there are parts of the text that seem to me to be coming from different centuries. But that too is not the burden of my remarks. So watch out for Gaffney distractions. This film has 3 acts, and it begins right from the beginning, exactly the way we heard this morning, with official state policy of anti-Semitism. That is what the whole gist of Bulgaria is about when it adopts a really crazy law to protect the national security of the nation. Well, you saw the last set of slides in here that didn't lead you to conclude with any reasonable basis that Jews were the enemies of the Bulgarian community, and they were the big, powerful. That's all a lot of anti-Semitic nonsense. But it's the official state policy of Bulgaria. Now ask yourself, where does official commitment to national policy that believes all the junk of anti-Semitism go? Well, as a Christian, I can tell you where Christian anti-Semitism went. It went from the 4th century on into contempt and hatred for Jews that made Good Friday one of the most dangerous days in their life, because they had heard a gospel that blamed Jews rather than the Romans for the death of Jesus, whom I think all of us, if we know anything about him at all, is that he is a Jew who surrenders his life, who dies, but doesn't kill. In any event, the idea of persecuting Jews, which is exactly what Bulgaria did, is given to me by very live, very real, very present, here and now testimony from Jamili Kalanamas on behalf of the Jews of Macedonia, and by Sabi Kimino. You saw the thing about the tobacco people in various parts of Greece and Thrace. Well, Sabi met me right at the front door of one of these tobacco companies in Greece. And the first encounter with Sabi was really extraordinary. He starts shouting at me. You could hear him about 5 blocks away. I am not going to talk to you in English. I said, okay. But I say in Spanish, oh, por supuesto. ¿Por qué no vamos a hablar entonces en, no sé, latino? Me hablas y puedo traducir, I can translate it, we'll get subtitles in there, and you can say, and then he stares at me. An American that knows a little bit more than one language? You're not a monoglot? And he then says, don't you want to know why I am not? He's talking to me in English now. You don't want to know why I am not talking to you in English? I don't know. Tell me. Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They knew. They knew, and they didn't care, and they did nothing. Well, that word nothing is at the heart of Hitler's threat on January the 30th, 1939, that if these Jews with their bankers, it's a loose translation of this threat, think that they can start a world war and gain power, they got another thing coming. Because what's going to happen is not a Jewish triumph or the Bolshevization of the earth, but rather the annihilation. Vernichtung means nothingness. It doesn't say the animal metaphor of extermination. It's annihilation that is the goal of Nazi Germany. That's where anti-Semitism goes. It goes to the camps. Okay, not the day he says it, but the threat is out there. It's 6 years after he takes over, and now things are going to start happening very rapidly. In September, we'll bomb level the city of Warsaw and reduce any Polish resistance, and then eventually, with the absorption of more and more territory that it has Jewish people in it, have the capable actions that are necessary to carry out the threat. When the threat is being carried out in Sofia, it is already initiated with a Bulgarian impulse to do something evil, namely to make a national policy of anti-Semitism. I don't know how you can describe that law any differently. I read it very carefully about 3 or 4 times. And I'm a lawyer, I know how to read laws. But the actions, Reinhardt actions that go into first, Helmno, Majdanek, Belzec, those kinds of camps that are rather primitive in their operation, or Treblinka with its massively efficient way of thinking of things. And we should never call those camps factories in the sense that they're putting out Porsches and beautiful automobiles or anything. They were sloppy, messy, dirty, rotten, anti-human acts. There was nothing of elegance in those so-called factories. And maybe we ought to abandon that word as a way of describing the camps, because they deserve more contempt than that. Well, if that's what persecution leads to, namely the mass murder of the first installment, and let me be very clear about that. And again, it's from Jackie Conforti that I got the clear instruction of what that 20,000 meant. It didn't mean that that's the limit of where they were going. It meant it was the first part. And that's exactly what happened with the events of May the 24th as well, is that those Jews were saved for a time. But there was no repudiation of the potential ongoing possibility. People were still going to be frightened to death of where they were being moved out of Sofia to where? To the same place along the Danube River that the Greek Jews had been brought up to get on a boat to go to Vienna, not to do some nice waltzes, but to be put on a train just the way the Macedonian Jews had been put on the train that went straight 1,600 kilometers to Treblinka. And when those people got off the train, they went on to Himmelstrasse. Anybody here with enough German to translate? Street. Well, Heaven Street? This was hell on earth, beyond the imagination of Dante. It's inferno that is both freezing cold and intense heat and fire, and it is the worst place on earth. Okay? Did you say 5 or 2? Okay, thank you. The people that I wanted to honor in the last moment of my remarks are Sabi Camino, Jamila Kalanimus, and there's one more, I'll get to that in a minute, because they are the ones who are the witnesses to the suffering, and there's something very real and very powerful about survivor testimony. First of all, there's no motive to lie. Secondly, when they are speaking the truth of their stories, they move us to tears, because it gives us the opportunity, those of us who have survived, to enter into a space that is difficult for us to imagine, let alone to articulate. Sabi and Jamila used to talk to one another every week, and Jamila is the one, she is the one who got together all of the train lists, and that's where my experience as a dad comes into it. With all those people identified with the help of IBM computing into the categories of identification, I knew the date of birth of every single person on those trains. And I got from Raoul Hilberg, the counsel, find the train list, study it carefully, and don't do a thing about your film until you've done that. Promise me, he said. I said, okay, I'll try. Well, first of all, I didn't find the train list, but I did find Jamila's police records, which are, they're very much similar to it, those 5 things I said before. And what happened then is I would look at birthdays. And I found a mother who is age 43 and her son, age 23, born on the same day, on their birthday in one of those boxcars heading to Treblinka. Those are the things that happen if you pay enough close attention to the research that is necessary to do art in a way that is moving and powerful. The last thing that I want to say about that is what I said at the beginning about the Lehre of Hagen. Nazi Deutsch is not like the difference between Hochdeutsch and Münchners and that sort of thing, a Bayerische. It's about deception. It's about using words in a very false, empty, hollow way. Imagine that your job is to protect murderers from any responsibility for their mass murder. You want to make them feel good about their job. You know, it's like Eichmann saying he just was making the trains run on time. It was just a kind of a, don't blame me, there must be some higher up. Well, wait a minute. The trial that is going on based on the Nuremberg principles say there isn't any excuse for mass murder that can you say, oh, somebody else told me to do it. Who told those people in the Einsatzgruppen to go out and with a rifle at, excuse me, I don't want to point it at anybody because it's too offensive of a thing to do. But we have pictures of people killing a mother with a little baby, just as I have train records of the youngest kid on the train is 2 months old. And the oldest guy in the train is 99 years old. So whether you want to get rid of elders or you don't give a damn about a little baby, that, my friends, is a crime against humanity. And it brings out all of the depth of my pain as a dad, that I couldn't do a damn thing about it except make this film and come back here and say hello to some of you and urge you to carry on.
Thank you, Ed. I look forward to watch your movie tomorrow. Next speaker. עורך דין רינה שעשוע חסון,